I've never met such pathetic lovers in my life, and my wife found one of them. I used to assume that people cheat because of feelings, passion, and everything else, but my wife committed treason for her own benefit, and it looked very mean. It's just a pity that all her efforts were in vain because I was already preparing to strike. As a youngster, one evening my parents rented All the President's Men, and watching Woodward and Bernstein uncover the secrets of the White House filled me with inspiration. It was then that I resolved to pursue a career in journalism. The prospect of becoming a dedicated reporter, challenging the corrupt establishment, drove me to aim for admission to Columbia University's School of Journalism. Through a combination of good grades, a scholarship, and a substantial student loan, I managed to achieve this goal. Columbia University provided me with 3 invaluable assets: a top-notch education, a reasonable prospect of securing an entry-level job in the media industry upon graduation, and a wonderful spouse. Allow me to elaborate on each. Columbia stands as one of the nation's foremost journalism schools, imparting not only the basics of researching, reporting, and writing news stories, but also the techniques of investigative journalism, broadcast reporting, and digital media. My instructors included seasoned journalists actively working in the field and esteemed professors. The one thing they didn't prepare me for was navigating the fiercely competitive journalism job market. With an oversupply of reporters, editors, and media professionals, coupled with the industry's steep decline, especially in newspapers, finding employment was daunting. Even if one secures a job, the compensation is typically minimal. This was the challenging landscape I faced as I approached the end of my college years. As graduation approached, my desperation for employment led me to contemplate accepting an unpaid internship solely for the sake of gaining experience. However, at the 11th hour, a connection through my father's friend, a Columbia University alumnus, came to my rescue. He offered me a position as an assistant copy editor and fact-checker at a newspaper in the Washington, D.C. area. Though not the career path I had envisioned, I grasped the opportunity like a drowning person clings to a life buoy. One of the motivating factors behind my desperate search for employment was the fact that amidst my class timetable and reporting assignments, I had somehow managed to find time to fall deeply in love. In fact, I had taken the significant step of becoming engaged during my senior year. Nicole, my fiancée, was studying political science, and we had initially crossed paths in a comparative politics class during our junior year. She possessed intelligence, eloquence, ambition, and stunning beauty. What began as a friendship in the classroom swiftly evolved into an increasingly intimate and profound emotional connection. I soon realized that the fervor she exhibited during political debates was mirrored in our own passionate encounters. Simply put, we couldn't satiate our desire for each other, and it wasn't long before we recognized that our aspirations extended far beyond our college years. Unlike myself, Nikki had her future neatly planned out. A congressman from her hometown, serving his 3rd term, was a close friend of her parents. He had assured them that upon her graduation, she would secure a position as an aide in his Washington office. Thus, my opportunity to find work in D.C. felt like a stroke of luck, leading us to tie the knot right after graduating. Despite both of us being employed, we could only afford a small walk-up apartment in Bethesda. Far from luxurious, yet in the glow of youth and love, such inconveniences seemed trivial. Nikki enthusiastically immersed herself in the workings of Capitol Hill, finding the new environment to her liking. Meanwhile, I was grateful for employment, but I found my duties somewhat unfulfilling. Correcting others' writing didn't align well with my aspirations of becoming an investigative journalist. Nonetheless, I kept reassuring myself that it was better than being jobless, and perhaps it could open doors to more fulfilling opportunities. As it turned out, that's precisely what happened, albeit not in the manner I had anticipated. One afternoon, I was summoned to my boss's office, where I found myself seated on a rigid wooden chair facing his desk. His scrutinizing gaze made me uneasy. Eventually, he presented a document, which I identified as my resume. "It states here that you possess writing skills. Is that accurate?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I responded sincerely. "And it also mentions you're quite knowledgeable, particularly academically. Is that correct?" Well, I performed adequately in school, I replied humbly, although I had graduated with honors. I didn't feel it was appropriate to boast at that moment. He let out a sigh. All right, here's the situation. Agatha Cornwell is retiring next week. Someone needs to take over her column. That someone is you. I gulped nervously. Agatha Cornwell wasn't exactly a daring journalist. In fact, she wasn't a journalist at all. She penned the paper's daily column offering advice to the lovelorn. Most of the time, no one on staff bothered to read it, and when they did, it was met with ridicule. Being tasked with writing it had to be the worst job imaginable, even worse than penning obituaries. The boss seemed to mistake my reaction for eagerness. Now, don't get your hopes up. The truth is, the column has one of the lowest readerships in the paper, but it does have a small, loyal following, so the managing editor doesn't want to scrap it and cause a stir. And we don't want Agatha's readers to know she's gone either, so keep it under wraps that you're the new Aunt Agatha. Got it? I nodded, understanding his instructions. He didn't need to worry. The last thing I wanted was for anyone I knew to find out I was now writing an advice column. He gave me that stern, penetrating look again. Don't mess it up. Got it? I nodded and exited his office, heading back to my desk to lament my situation. An advice column? How would I ever face Nikki and our friends if news got out? I'd be the joke of the Columbia School of Journalism. The only solace was that due to the boss's orders, I couldn't disclose my new assignment, but even that offered little comfort. Wonderful, I thought gloomily, not only do I have the worst job at the paper, but I can't even vent about it to anyone. Upon returning home that evening, Nikki asked why I looked so down, but I fabricated a story about a tough day at work, and thankfully she didn't press further as she was eager to share news about her job. She was thrilled because it turned out her new boss was making waves in political circles. Congressmen were common in Washington, but Timothy Vickers was quickly rising as a standout figure in his party. He was young, attractive, and incredibly articulate. He and his wife made a striking couple, prompting speculation about his future. One of the other aides mentioned he's being considered as potential vice presidential material. Nikki exclaimed excitedly. Just imagine, I might end up working in the White House someday. I must admit I wasn't as thrilled about her good fortune as I should have been. While I was happy for her, deep down I was still feeling sorry for myself about my new assignment. On Monday morning, I was directed to my new workspace, and to my surprise, I discovered that I actually had a small office. It was a small consolation for accepting such a demeaning job. However, as I settled behind the worn wooden desk, I found myself overwhelmed. The room was a mess, with letters and papers scattered everywhere. I felt completely lost, not knowing where to begin. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door, and a young woman about my age peeked in. "Hi," she said. "I'm Mandy. I'm here to assist you." "An assistant? I have my own office and an assistant?" Perhaps this situation wasn't going to be as terrible as I had anticipated. "Hello, Mandy," I replied. "I'm Casey, and I'm completely at a loss here. Please come in and enlighten me about what's going on." With a bright smile, she settled herself onto the small chair next to my desk and initiated a conversation. It didn't take long for me to gather that Mandy had only joined Agatha's team 3 months prior and wasn't initially enthusiastic about her role. "It's not exactly hard-hitting journalism," she admitted, "but it grows on you over time. There's a sense of fulfillment in helping all those people out there who are desperate for guidance." Handing me a pile of Agatha's recent columns to peruse, I quickly formed a mental image of a kind-hearted elderly woman diligently working week after week to offer nuggets of wisdom and practical advice to her audience of the uncertain. Mandy proceeded to display a selection of the letters that arrived consistently every day. As I perused them, I couldn't help but notice that Aunt Agatha's inquiries were uniformly mundane and uninteresting. When I queried Mandy about this, she slyly winked and handed me another batch of letters. "What are these?" I inquired. With a sheepish grin, she replied, "Those are the questions Agatha chose not to address." She was rather uncomfortable discussing certain topics, particularly those she deemed peculiar or improper. Upon delving into the contents of the second stack, I swiftly realized that we had a considerable number of eccentric and risque readers. Turning to Mandy, I remarked with a grin, "While I may not be an expert in this field, I assure you we won't be evading inquiries about naughty subjects any longer. That's precisely the kind of content people are interested in, and we're going to deliver." She gave me a concerned look. "I'm on board with that, but I'm uncertain about management's reaction. They've been accustomed to a more conservative approach for quite some time, if you catch my drift." "Listen, I didn't seek out this assignment," I informed her, "but now that it's mine, I intend to handle it my way. If the boss isn't pleased, they can find someone else. Are you with me?" She smiled. "All right, count me in." Luckily, Agatha had prepared her columns in advance, giving me a small backlog. This allowed me time to review letters from the Do Not Answer file and select ones for my first column. I deliberated on the style I aimed to adopt, intending to provide answers reflecting my beliefs with a touch of attitude. After a few attempts, I gained enough confidence to share excerpts of my initial draft with Mandy for feedback. "Dear Aunt Agatha, I'm in a dilemma. I adore my wife, but recently I've come to terms with my bisexuality. I want to explore this side of me with other men I've met. As long as I don't engage with other women, I don't see it as infidelity. What's your take?" Switch hitter. Dear switch hitter, regardless of which side of the plate you swing from, it's still a breach of trust in your marriage. Dear Aunt Agatha, my husband and I have had a blissful 10 years together, but I recently strayed with a colleague. I'm consumed with guilt. Should I come clean and beg for forgiveness? Remorseful Roberta. Dear remorseful Roberta, confessing may alleviate your guilt, but it shifts the burden onto your husband. Keep it to yourself and demonstrate your remorse through actions, not words. The guilt serves as a reminder of your wrongdoing. Dear Aunt Agatha, a married coworker sent me an inappropriate photo. What should I do? Grossed out. Dear grossed out, why not forward the message to his wife and see what she thinks? I'm sure she'll have an opinion. Mandy glanced at me, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. I'm not sure how management will react, but they certainly can't accuse your column of being dull. As expected, later that afternoon my boss barged into my office brandishing the submitted column. What on earth do you think you're doing, Casey? He bellowed. Aunt Agatha's readers are a bunch of delicate old ladies. You're going to upset them with this sort of content. I refused to back down. You tasked me with a job, and I completed it. Why not give it a chance before dismissing it? He snorted in frustration and stormed out. Though he ultimately allowed the column to be published, alongside the print edition, our paper also had an online version providing us with instant feedback. Despite Mandy's earlier claim that Ask Aunt Agatha rarely elicited much response, I was surprised when she visited my office the following day and pulled up the online feedback for my column on my computer. It seemed my first attempt had stirred quite a reaction. While some readers criticized Aunt Agatha for being flippant about serious matters, others applauded her bold stances. I hadn't anticipated any response, so I felt apprehensive about the strong reactions I had incited. However, Mandy seemed thrilled. This is the most significant response I've ever seen to an Aunt Agatha column, she informed me. Still uncertain, I remarked, some of the feedback wasn't favorable towards what I said or how I said it. Who cares? She exclaimed cheerfully. At least you got them thinking. In the following days, the reaction to the column mirrored the initial one. Comments poured in, both supportive and critical of the new tone and topics. I couldn't help but wonder how management would react to it all. Over the next 2 weeks, I found the answer to a question I had pondered when starting the new job. Why did I need an assistant? As I witnessed the influx of letters, I began to understand. When Mandy showed me how to manage the Aunt Agatha email account, I started to question whether 2 people would be sufficient to handle the volume. Each letter and email needed to be read, sorted by date, and categorized. Some were earmarked for a response, others were disregarded, and some were set aside for further consideration. We would then discuss the ones requiring a reply and determine the appropriate response. At times, we had differing opinions. For instance, when Mandy burst into laughter while going through the mail and came across a particular letter. "This one's going straight to the trash," she chuckled. "It's clearly a fake." However, upon reading it myself, I recognized its potential for inclusion in the next day's column. "Dear Aunt Agatha, recently, I was awoken from a deep slumber by a little green man who escorted me to his spaceship and conducted various examinations on my body with alien devices. Yesterday, I discovered I am pregnant. What should I do? Abducted by aliens. Dear Abducted by Aliens, I suggest you take this letter to your creative writing professor and inform them that I've advised they give you an F. On the following Friday afternoon, I had just wrapped up preparing my column for Monday when the boss unexpectedly appeared at my office door. I had been avoiding him since our last interaction, so his sudden presence immediately put me on edge. I've received the latest report on our online site's hits, he said, his expression grim. And I've also reviewed the feedback on your column. I held my breath, bracing for his verdict. They might not always appreciate your sharp remarks, he continued, but they're certainly reading your content. The hits on Ask Aunt Agatha have increased by 35%. Looks like you're safe for another week. With that, he exited my office, leaving me stunned. It felt reminiscent of that famous actress's Oscar speech, "You like me, you really like me." Mandy, who had been listening in, rushed in to congratulate me with a warm hug. "Congratulations, Casey. These are fantastic results, and it's rare for the boss to deliver such news in person. He must be genuinely pleased." Returning her hug, I put on a modest facade, saying, "Oh, it was nothing, really," but deep down, I felt a surge of pride. While it might not be the dream job, at least I was making strides in the one I had. Driving home that evening, my only regret was not being able to share the news with Nikki. However, I didn't have much time to dwell on it because upon arriving home, Nikki reminded me of our weekend plans. Her boss, Congressman Vickers, had organized a staff retreat at a wealthy supporters' estate on the Wye River, and partners were invited to join. I suppose, due to my background in journalism, I tend to be quite skeptical of most elected officials. When I heard about Congressman Klain, as the media had labeled him, preaching about family values and personal morality, it left me feeling rather uneasy. Consequently, I wasn't particularly excited about mingling with Congressman Vickers and his entourage, but Nikki was enthusiastic, so I kept my reservations to myself. However, when I had the chance to chat with him later over drinks, I found him to be quite charming, albeit earnest. The following day, while Nikki and the other staffers were in a meeting with him, I had the opportunity to meet Mrs. Vickers, and my impression was even more positive. I had anticipated encountering a stereotypical, rehearsed step-forward wife with a campaign spiel ready to go at a moment's notice. Instead, I encountered a quiet, reflective woman whose only visible setback was a noticeable limp. Without any prompting, she shared that it resulted from a car accident shortly after their marriage. "It was quite dreadful," she confessed, "and unfortunately, I cannot bear children. But I'm grateful to be alive, so I don't dwell on it." I was amazed by her bravery as well as her husband's decision to support her. Maybe he's one of the good people, I told myself. Later that evening, in our room, Nikki was full of energy. "He said he was really pleased with my work," she exclaimed. "He mentioned how much he depends on my help." Undressing, I suggested, "Why don't you come over here and see if you can help me?" We made passionate love, falling asleep afterward. I was thinking, in the end, this weekend turned out to be quite successful. Sunday morning found us seated on the patio, enjoying our breakfast. Nikki, being her usual self, had grabbed a copy of the Washington Post, yet in a show of solidarity, she also picked up a copy of my newspaper. I chuckled as I watched her delve into the living section, engrossed in Ask Aunt Agatha. "What's the appeal of that column?" I inquired. "I suppose I'm just like everyone else. I enjoy peeking into other people's lives," she admitted without hesitation. "Plus, lately, Aunt Agatha's been quite captivating, and her advice is rather insightful. I nearly let it slip then, but I managed to hold back, struggling to contain my excitement. Wouldn't she be surprised if she knew? I mused to myself, feeling a surge of mischief. In the following week, I became increasingly comfortable in my new position. A significant factor in this ease was having Mandy as my colleague, who proved to be a delight to work alongside. Through our conversations during lunch breaks, I discovered that our backgrounds shared similarities. Like me, she harbored ambitions of becoming a reporter. However, instead of attending Columbia, she opted for the University of Missouri, renowned for its exceptional journalism program. Similarly, she faced challenges securing a reporting job after graduation. Her role as an assistant came about when management realized Aunt Agatha required assistance in her duties. Collaborating, we were able to strategize our column rather than merely reacting day by day. We began selecting letters to address based on specific themes, ensuring they aligned more logically with current events. Gone were the days of addressing letters about summer romances during the Christmas season. Additionally, Mandy excelled in research, sourcing valuable resources for Aunt Agatha to recommend to her readers when they sought expert assistance. One day, we got an email from a young reader that proved incredibly urgent. The message read, "Dear Aunt Agatha, I'm 14 and feeling lost. My friends and I have been inhaling gasoline to get high. Initially, it seemed okay, but now I'm vomiting and feeling constantly dizzy. I'm frightened and unsure of what to do. My parents warned they'd send me away if they caught me using drugs. Please, I need your help. Signed, Alone in Alexandria." How unbelievably foolish can parents become? I fumed as Mandy presented me with the email. Their daughter could be facing serious health issues, and yet they've completely shut down communication with her. Then a chilling thought struck me. What if her condition is critical? We can't afford to wait for a response in the paper. We need to find a way to reach her immediately. Mandy brought me back to reality. We don't have her phone number or address, and the email she used is likely fake. I refuse to believe there's no way to identify her and locate her, I responded in frustration. You start researching where she might seek help while I speak with Amir. Perhaps he can offer some insight on reaching her. Amir, our resident tech expert, knew the ins and outs of networks, computers, and the internet like no one else. When I found him and explained the situation, he pondered for a moment. That's a tricky one, he admitted. Emails often pass through numerous servers, making it nearly impossible to trace the original sender. However, I have a friend at the NSA. If anyone can help, it's them. I encouraged him to offer any assistance he could and then went to check on Mandy's progress. She had located a free clinic in the Alexandria area specializing in helping teenagers with substance abuse issues. Understanding that finding our 14-year-old reader immediately was improbable, we opted to respond to her email and hoped that Alone would check her mailbox and see Aunt Agatha's response. As a precaution, we also published the same response in the newspaper. At that point, all we could do was hope that she would come across one of these messages and seek help before it was too late. For the next 2 days, nothing noteworthy occurred, and both Mandy and I felt despondent. Then suddenly, everything changed. Amir burst in, waving a piece of paper excitedly. "I've got it," he exclaimed. My friend came through. Scarcely had he provided me with a home email address for Alone when Mandy burst in clutching a printout. "She followed your suggestion," she exclaimed, and we promptly perused the email. "Dear Aunt Agatha, I visited the location you suggested, and they provided significant assistance. I've ceased vomiting and no longer feel dizzy. In fact, I'm improving so much that I'm determined to persuade my friends to abstain from using heroin. Thank you. Not Alone in Alexandria." I glanced at Mandy, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the latest twist of events. "But at least we've made an impact," Mandy reassured me. "Your column is making a difference, even if it's in an unexpected way." I hoped she was right. A few weeks later, the boss stormed into my office, his usual scowl in place. "I don't know if you're skilled, kid, but you're certainly the luckiest person I know. I'd grown accustomed to his outbursts, so I simply looked up and asked, "All right, what's the issue this time?" Against all odds, your insignificant column has garnered significant attention. Your readership is skyrocketing, and other papers have taken notice. Long story short, your column is going into syndication. Once the legal details are sorted, numerous papers across the country will be running Ask Aunt Agatha. As I sat there in disbelief, Mandy walked in and posed the crucial question, "What about the financial aspect?" The boss expressed his policy firmly. When a writer's work is syndicated, they split the revenues evenly with the paper, he explained, wearing a strained expression. If you can maintain this level of performance, you're on track to earn the kind of money usually reserved for the top players. Mandy cheered and embraced me tightly, both of us yelling and dancing around the room as the boss watched on disapprovingly. Once he left, Mandy planted a congratulatory kiss on my cheek, exclaiming, "Oh, Casey, this is fantastic news. I always knew you were something special." "We're a team," I assured her. "I couldn't have achieved this without you." She smiled warmly and kissed me again. "You're kind to say that, but it was your willingness to take risks and shake things up. You're the one who made your mark on the column, and you're the one who deserves all the success coming your way." I was bursting with excitement on my way home, eager to share the good news with Nikki. However, she arrived home very late, and when she finally did, her focus was solely on her congressman boss. It appeared that the party was actively seeking a new face for the upcoming convention, and Congressman Clayton's name was being circulated as potential vice presidential material. Nikki couldn't stop talking about how great a VP he would be and the role she would play in his campaign. I tried to show interest, but I started to feel like I was playing second fiddle in Nikki's orchestra. "Hey," I quipped, only half serious, "remember me while you're busy making all your plans." She waved me off. "You're just a copy editor," she said, dismissing me. "He's aiming for the top. He could be president of the United States one day." Seeing my reaction, she quickly tried to backtrack. "I mean, I'm sure what you do is valuable for the paper, but let's face it, it's not likely to be remembered in history." Her words stung, and I turned to leave before saying something I'd regret. She reached out to stop me, but her phone rang before she could do so. As she answered, it was someone from the congressman's office, and she was soon engrossed in the conversation. After stepping outside for a leisurely stroll around our neighborhood, it dawned on me that her statement held some truth. Indeed, if her congressman managed to ascend to the White House, he would undoubtedly gain fame, rightfully so. However, her comments didn't justify her disparagement of her husband. The more I pondered, the more apparent it became that Nikki's regard for me had noticeably diminished since she became involved in the congressman's inner circle. While I could comprehend her dedication to her work, her lack of enthusiasm for her spouse baffled me. Considering her perspective on our relationship, I opted to keep mum about my syndication plans. After all, it might be months before the deal materialized, and even then, it wouldn't hold the same allure to Nikki as her boss's vice presidential nomination. Upon my return from the walk, Nikki attempted to brush the issue aside, but our interactions were polite rather than affectionate. Regardless of my discontent with my marital situation, I still had a daily column to write. However, it was inevitable that my personal life would start to affect my work. A few days later, I stumbled upon a hopelessly romantic email in my inbox, and in my cynical state, I decided to respond firmly to the sender. "Dear Aunt Agatha, I've developed feelings for an amazing man at my workplace. He's intelligent, humorous, caring, and not to mention attractive. The only issue is that he's married. Should I confess my feelings to him? Sincerely, his secret admirer." Dear secret admirer, listen closely. Keep your emotions to yourself. No matter how genuine your affection may be, you have no right to interfere in this man's marriage. While he is married, you should refrain from expressing your feelings. If this proves too difficult for you, consider finding a different job. Aunt Agatha faced some criticism from the sentimental members of her audience who wished to give the secret admirer an opportunity. But I had reached my limit with outsiders meddling in marriages by that point and was not willing to yield. Back at home, the situation continued to worsen. Nikki's job demanded longer hours, with her travels becoming so frequent that I could only anticipate her return by checking the itinerary she left in the home office. She was constantly traveling with the congressman for fundraisers or party strategy sessions. When she did return, she was too exhausted to do much besides eating and sleeping, with any other intimate activities becoming increasingly rare. Adding to the gloom of my married life, things also took a downturn at work. Mandy, who had always been cheerful and positive, suddenly fell into a melancholy state. It was evident that something troubled her deeply, but despite my efforts, she refused to confide in me. It seemed ironic that I could offer assistance to strangers, but not to someone I knew and cared about. Amidst Nikki's aloofness and Mandy's despondency, my days turned into stressful affairs. I found myself becoming somewhat irritable, even snapping at Mandy on occasion, which I regretted deeply. Despite my intentions, it seems my words had a greater impact than I realized. One morning, Mandy entered my office and handed in her resignation letter. "You can't leave, Mandy," I exclaimed, feeling panicked. "I didn't mean what I said. Please forgive me and stay. I rely on you. What you said didn't upset me, Casey. I knew you didn't intend any harm." "Then please reconsider," I urged. "If you can forgive me, please stay." For a brief moment, I saw her hesitate, but then determination overtook her. "I'm sorry, Casey, but I have to leave. It's for the best." Before I could formulate a compelling argument to convince her otherwise, she turned and departed. I felt a wave of despair. Why were all the important women in my life slipping away from me? That afternoon, I attempted to contact her at her residence in hopes of compelling her to return, only to discover that she had moved out and disconnected her phone. Her cell phone service had also been terminated. Furthermore, upon inquiry, neither the Human Resources Department nor any of her friends were aware of her whereabouts. With Mandy absent, I began to realize even more the extent of her contributions to the smooth functioning of our small venture. Although HR arranged for a temporary replacement to assist with administrative tasks, the individual they procured was of little assistance in making decisions regarding the column. Moreover, the bond of friendship and camaraderie I shared with Mandy was irreplaceable. Frustratingly, something strange occurred that made me momentarily forget about Mandy. One day, an email landed in Aunt Agatha's inbox that truly unsettled me. It read, "Dear Aunt Agatha, my husband is a good man, but I don't see him going places." Meanwhile, I found myself in a passionate affair with someone who has a promising future ahead. I believe it's time for an upgrade, and I'm seeking advice on how to break the news to my soon-to-be ex going for the gold. Initially, I drafted a sarcastic reply and filed it away to send next week. However, the wording of the email triggered a memory, prompting me to revisit it. After a brief moment, I decided to take a stroll to clear my mind. "Hey, Amir," I greeted my friend. "Could your contact at the NSA help trace another message?" "Is it important?" he inquired. "I don't want to bother him with trivial matters." "If my suspicions are correct, it could be crucial," I replied. A few days later, Amir entered my office beaming. "Ask and you shall receive," he proclaimed dramatically. "My contact uncovered the sender of your mysterious message. It originated from an account in Bethesda." He passed me the information. "Here's the billing address associated with the account. Does it ring a bell?" Glancing at it, I realized its significance. Indeed, it was my home address. I was astounded by Nikki's foolishness in sending such an email to an advice column. I couldn't comprehend why anyone would seek guidance from a complete stranger. What's more, I couldn't fathom Nikki engaging in an affair with Congressman Clean, or vice versa. He was supposed to be happily married, and to make matters worse, he had cultivated an image centered around family values and morality. Yet here he was flaunting his hypocrisy by cavorting with my wife on the campaign trail. It was treachery on her part and sheer hypocrisy on his. My fury intensified with each passing moment. Was she planning to discard me callously to upgrade to another man? Whatever happened to the vows of for richer, for poorer, forsaking all others? I knew that I would likely spiral into deep depression at some point, but at that moment, all I could feel was a burning desire for revenge. After contemplating it for some time, I reached a decision. My initial action was to visit Sam Winston, the newspaper's seasoned chief political writer who was well-versed in navigating the intricacies of Washington. He had graciously assisted me in familiarizing myself with the workings of the newsroom when I first joined. Upon seeing me, he greeted me with a smile and inquired, "What brings you here, young Casey?" "I might have something to offer you this time, Sam," I replied. "How would you react if I could provide you with a story about Congressman Klein's clandestine affair with one of his aides?" "A story of that nature could potentially earn us a Pulitzer Prize," he remarked with a grin. "But regardless, I'd relish the opportunity to expose the hypocrisy of that sanctimonious politician." However, his expression turned serious. "What leads you to believe that the congressman is involved romantically with one of his aides?" I met his gaze evenly. "Because the aide he's involved with happens to be my wife." He blinked in surprise, but upon realizing I was earnest, he leaned in, his expression intense. "Let's discuss this further," he said. "Capturing an ordinary adulterer is relatively straightforward. They often lack creativity and caution. However, uncovering the misconduct of an elected official is a more challenging task. Politicians are accustomed to public scrutiny and tend to be more cunning. Nevertheless, a newspaper possesses substantial resources once it commits to utilizing them." Following Sam's presentation to the managing editor, all available resources were mobilized for our pursuit. I wasn't directly involved in the investigative team due to obvious reasons, but I facilitated Sam's efforts to document the congressman's indiscretions by providing Nikki's daily schedule. "Keep an eye on Nikki," I instructed Sam, "and you'll likely find the congressman there." As expected, 2 weeks later, Sam came into my office and closed the door behind him. "We've got him," he announced. When I looked at him questioningly, he continued, "Congressman Klein has definitely been involved in inappropriate behavior with your wife." Deep down, I had clung to a glimmer of hope that this was all a misunderstanding and that things could somehow return to normal. However, after Sam's revelation, I realized that hope was futile. Hope is resilient, but when it fades, bitterness often takes its place. "When do you plan to take action?" I inquired. "Should I start proceedings for a divorce?" "Don't worry," he reassured me. "There's time. We need more evidence against Congressman Vickers to establish a clear pattern of behavior, not just a one-time occurrence. Plus, we want to time it closer to the nominating convention for maximum impact." Sam's smile faded, his gaze hardening. "I despise hypocrites. When the congressman falls, he'll fall hard." I couldn't help but shudder involuntarily, feeling a twinge of pity for what was about to happen to Nikki. Almost immediately, our already strained marriage turned glacial. Nikki was hardly ever home, and when she was, our interactions resembled those of roommates more than spouses. Significantly, Nikki seemed oblivious to the lack of intimacy. Her mind, I suspected, was elsewhere, focused on someone else. Like Nikki, I found myself spending more and more time at the office. Work became my sole refuge from the pain, yet even there, reminders of Mandy surrounded me, offering no respite. I longed to confide in her, to seek her advice with her understanding ears, but it was as if she had vanished from existence. No one knew her whereabouts or how to contact her. I felt consumed by guilt over the possibility that my own grumpiness might have contributed to her disappearance. In the workplace, I purposefully avoided crossing paths with Sam Winston. While my curiosity about current events was intense, I reasoned that bothering him with questions would only add to his burdens. However, as discussions about Congressman Vickers' potential vice presidential candidacy intensified with the approaching convention, I couldn't help but wonder about the progress of Sam's investigation. So when Sam phoned me one Monday and requested my presence in the conference room within his vicinity, I felt a sense of relief. Upon entering, he signaled for me to shut the door behind me. "Things are set to unfold in the coming days," he informed me. He'll be staying at the Hay Adams Hotel on Wednesday night, and we plan to confront him Thursday morning. The story will hit the papers on Friday morning, and then chaos will ensue. In that moment, relief washed over me. My facade of a marriage was finally reaching its end, and I could cease pretending to my social circle and family that everything was fine between Nikki and me. Before you get too carried away, Sam interjected, interrupting my thoughts. There's something you ought to hear. We managed to secure the room adjacent to your wife's a week ago. We've installed some new recording devices that are highly sensitive, and their discretion was lacking. He gestured towards the MP3 player on the table before promptly exiting the room. Putting headphones on my ears, I prepared for what I expected would be akin to watching an amateur adult video featuring my wife. However, what I heard was somewhat different. Of course, there was enough of both, but what struck me the most was the congressman's obvious need and Nikki's constant attempts to calm him down. At one point, he asked, "I'm much bigger than your husband, aren't I?" To which she replied with a purr, "Oh yes, you're twice his size." I chuckled to myself. Yes, that's right, a confident man will ask about this, I thought. Doubtful, he then instructed her, "Tell me how much better I am than Casey." "He never made you feel the way you feel with me, did he?" To which she invariably reassured him, "He was never close to it, baby. You're the best thing I've ever had." I was thinking inwardly, is this guy really that insecure? However, the most revealing aspect occurred later. After what seemed like a long preparation for intimacy, which obviously consisted only of her work, and as he began, I heard the sounds of cheating. My ex-wife praised him, and it was ridiculous. I was shocked she pretended to have fun. I recognized the difference in her sounds. Sam wouldn't have needed sophisticated listening devices if Nikki had actually achieved satisfaction. At first, I felt a pang of pride in my manhood, knowing that the congressman was such a pathetic lover. But on reflection, I felt even worse. Nikki wasn't leaving me because she found someone who could really please her. She was leaving because she found a way to realize her own ambitions. She doesn't love this man, I realized. She wants to be the first lady. How could I ever love such a flawed, selfish woman? My indignation increased. I felt relieved that my marriage was about to end. Just at that moment, Sam returned to the room. "Are you all right?" he inquired. I nodded. "When you confront him on Thursday, will she be accompanying him?" I queried. "Most likely," he replied, "if they stick to their usual pattern." "In that case, I want to be present," I informed him. He glanced at me with concern. "You're not planning anything reckless, are you, Casey? No thoughts of revenge or the like?" I shook my head. "Don't worry, Sam. After what I've just heard, she's not worth it. All I want is the satisfaction of personally serving her with divorce papers." He nodded. "I understand, but you have to let me and the photographer do our job first." At 5 p.m., we waited in the wood-paneled lobby of the Hay Adams. The hotel staff, though curious about us, recognized Sam as one of the prominent reporters in town, so they didn't bother him. Sam must have received a message through his earpiece because he turned to the photographer and me and announced, "They're coming down." We stood gathered near the elevators with me positioned at the back. Sam gave me a stern look over his shoulder. "Remember, no aggressive behavior." I responded with a Boy Scout salute. "I promise, Sam." Just then, the elevator doors opened, and Nikki and the congressman emerged. The flash from the photographer's camera caught them off guard. After blinking several times, the congressman recognized Sam and regained his composure. "Well, hello, Sam. Always good to see one of our esteemed journalists at work." "But isn't it a bit early for questions?" the congressman said. The reporter disregarded his comment. "Congressman Vickers, would you like to comment on why you and your aide left her room so early in the morning?" I have to admit, the guy was pretty agile. "Of course, Sam. Nicole and I just had a short conversation to review my schedule for the day," the congressman replied. "I understand. Could you explain then why that short discussion in her room started at 11 p.m. last night and continued without interruption until a few minutes ago? Sam insisted. Well, you see, the congressman stammered, trying to regain his composure, but Sam didn't give him a chance. Perhaps this photo taken of both of you earlier this month will help to better understand your relationship, Sam continued, showing them the picture. Sam had shown me this before. The photographer used a powerful telephoto lens to capture them in an embrace high up in a glass-walled elevator outside the Marriott Hotel. What made the picture so incriminating was the fact that the congressman was touching Nikki. Although the hug lasted only a few seconds, the lens had enough time to capture a compromising picture. How do you think this will affect your position on family values, Congressman? Sam continued relentlessly. As the confrontation between the congressman and Sam unfolded, Nikki stood in shock, her eyes frantically darting around. Suddenly, they stopped at me, and she exclaimed, "Casey, what are you doing here?" That was a clear signal if I've ever heard one, I thought as I approached her. "I've come to personally deliver this divorce petition to you," I stated calmly, handing her the papers. She gasped. "Oh, and just so you know," I added, "if you're still wondering about Aunt Agatha's question, you'll find the answer in today's newspaper." With that, I handed her the morning paper open to my column, then turned away. "Wait," I heard her call after me. How could you? I turned my head to catch her gaze fixed on the opening query and asked Aunt Agatha. "Dear Aunt Agatha, my husband is a decent man, but his ambitions are limited. Meanwhile, I found myself in a passionate affair with someone with promising prospects. Now that an opportunity to upgrade has presented itself, I'm inclined to seize it. Any advice on breaking the news to my soon-to-be ex?" In response, Aunt Agatha reassured going for the gold that there's no need for concern. Her husband is fully aware of the situation and has already initiated the separation. Some of my readers found Aunt Agatha's response a bit confusing, but I had been writing with her in mind, and I was fairly certain she understood the message. When Sam's story hit the headlines on Friday morning, it sparked a frenzy in the media. It appeared that many people weren't receptive to moral lectures, especially when the one delivering them was revealed to be a hypocrite. The initial reports were quickly followed by the announcement that the esteemed congressman was no longer being considered for his party's vice presidential nomination. Shortly afterward, Congressman Vickers's wife appeared live on the Oprah Winfrey Network. Oprah offered gentle solace to the tearful woman while publicly denouncing her unfaithful husband to millions of viewers. The subsequent divorce proceedings were highly publicized and messy. In the end, the congressman foolishly opted to run for re-election in his own district. He was overwhelmingly defeated and subsequently faded entirely from the political scene. It's quite fitting, I mused. His name may be remembered by history, but it will be associated with disgrace. Regarding Nikki, she found herself pursued by tabloid reporters seeking details about the other woman. I changed the locks on our apartment, so she had to temporarily stay with a friend. When the paparazzi became overwhelming, she left town and eventually moved back in with her parents. Our divorce proceeded swiftly. Nikki couldn't contest the adultery allegations made public. She attempted to reach out to me a few times, but I insisted that all communication go through my lawyer, and she stopped trying. We divided our assets evenly, and since the syndication deal was still pending, she didn't receive any of those funds. After my involvement in the expose was revealed, I gained some minor fame within the paper, but whenever people began probing with too many questions, my boss would swiftly intervene and chase them away. He was a stern individual, yet I grew to appreciate him despite his gruff demeanor. I had anticipated feeling relieved after divorcing Nikki, but instead, I found myself sinking deeper into depression. It wasn't her absence I mourned, but rather the loss of the loving relationship we once shared. I resented her for depriving me of that. Although I dabbled in dating, it felt repetitive and uninspiring. One day, while wallowing in self-pity at my desk, I caught myself daydreaming about Mandy once again. I felt remorseful for pushing her away, realizing it was a loss for both of us. Recalling an advice letter I had responded to months earlier regarding office romances, I dug through my files until I found it. As I revisited my response, I realized I had been overly critical of the letter's author and pondered how I would approach the same question now. Then a sudden realization hit me, and I checked the date of the email I had received. Could it be possible? Hastily, I made my way to Amir's workspace, tightly gripping the note in my hand. Amir, I understand it's a big request, but could you possibly reach out to your NSA contact to check one more email for me? It would mean a great deal, I pleaded. Reluctantly, he accepted the email address from me. This better be worth it, he warned. Believe me, I insisted, it's a matter of life or death. When I next encountered him, his expression was troubled. I'm not sure what game you're playing, Casey, but that email originated right here from the newspaper's offices. I knew it, I exclaimed, enveloping the surprised technician in a hug. It was Mandy all along. Of course, she harbored feelings for me but didn't know how to express them, and I realized I had essentially pushed her away with my words. No wonder she resigned and left town. What a terrible counselor I turned out to be. I had someone incredibly special right in front of me, yet I failed to recognize it. Not only did I overlook her, but I actually succeeded in driving her away. I was determined to locate her, but every direction I turned seemed to lead to a dead end. Her old acquaintances hadn't heard from her, her Facebook page was inactive, and HR wouldn't grant me access to her job application. However, a helpful clerk discreetly informed me that she hadn't listed any next of kin for me to reach out to. Even the University of Missouri, where she graduated, had no recent record of her. My personal struggles with loneliness, depression from my failed marriage, and the frustration of being unable to find the one person who truly mattered to me were taking a toll on my professional performance. It reached a point where my boss intervened, bluntly telling me to snap out of it or risk losing our syndication deal. His words, though harsh, jolted me into action. I realized I needed to refocus and give my job the attention it deserved. I couldn't afford to mess things up, especially considering my previous failures with Aunt Agatha, Nikki, and Mandy. I had developed a genuine affection for Aunt Agatha and her readers despite my own shortcomings. All of a sudden, a notion struck me. It seemed absurd, idealistic, and perhaps futile, but desperate situations call for desperate actions. Dear Aunt Agatha, I once worked alongside a woman who embodied everything I ever desired. However, amidst the chaos of my life, I failed to recognize her true worth. Consequently, I allowed her to slip away, and now I am at a loss on how to locate her. What steps can I take to rectify the gravest error of my life? Blind in Bethesda. Dear Blind in Bethesda, your only hope rests on the possibility that one day she will discover your sentiments and grant you another opportunity. Should that day arrive, ensure you seize it and never let her slip away again. I understand what a foolish, meaningless gesture this seemed, but I felt compelled to attempt it if only to reassure myself. A few days later, I was summoned to the upstairs office. Waiting for me were a couple of lawyers and the managing editor himself. Since I had only met him once before, I felt quite intimidated. However, he quickly made me feel comfortable by explaining that the purpose of the meeting was to sign the contract for syndicating Ask Aunt Agatha. Once I signed the agreement, my daily column would be distributed in newspapers across the country starting the following week. From then on, the newspaper and I would split the weekly earnings generated by the deal. To sweeten the deal even more, the managing editor informed me with a smile that the number of newspapers carrying Aunt Agatha had increased from 12 to 22 during the negotiation, with the possibility of even more after 6 months. After signing the papers and exchanging handshakes with everyone present, I walked back to my small office in a daze. For the first time in my life, I had the opportunity to earn a substantial income. Provided I could continue providing valuable content, I might not be a groundbreaking journalist like Woodward and Bernstein, but I was making a living in my chosen field and perhaps even offering some beneficial advice to my readers along the way. I should have been overjoyed, but instead, I found myself longing for someone to share my good news with. After work, I joined some fellow reporters for a couple of beers but kept quiet about my news. I knew it would spread eventually, but I didn't want to boast. Later, when I left the bar, I spent a quiet evening at home. I did call my parents to share the news but asked them not to tell anyone. Aunt Agatha's identity was still officially a secret, though I knew the truth would come out eventually. The managing editor had mentioned keeping it quiet until they were ready to launch a publicity campaign. My parents were thrilled for me, but Mom was disappointed she couldn't brag to her friends. Dad was still a bit confused about my work, but he was happy I seemed financially secure for the foreseeable future. The following day, I was diligently sorting through a fresh pile of letters when a faint knock echoed through the door frame. Initially, I glanced up without spotting anyone, then a hesitant voice called out, "Casey." It was a voice I recognized. "Mandy," I exclaimed, abandoning my desk in a flurry of papers. I scooped her up, embracing her desperately. "I thought I'd lost you," I confessed, showering her with kisses as a rush of emotions flooded over me. Eventually, amidst the cacophony in my ears, I glanced up to find my office hallway filled with cheering colleagues. Mandy looked at me sheepishly. "They kind of trailed behind me when I came searching for you," she explained. Eventually, the excitement subsided, and my colleagues returned to their workstations, leaving only my boss lingering. He fixed Mandy with a stern gaze. "It's high time you returned," he remarked. "This fool has been useless since you left." As he departed, I whispered to Mandy, "For once, he's absolutely right." Dear Aunt Agatha, against all expectations, the woman I thought I had lost has returned to me, and she is even more amazing than I recall. What should my next steps be? Blind in Bethesda. Dear Blind in Bethesda, without delay, propose to her, you fool.